Hello, Python starters. We're going to talk today about type conversion. So as you're working with data in Python, one of the things you'll notice is that you frequently need to convert from one type to another. For example, from a string to an integer, or from a floating point to an integer, from an integer or floating point to a string, or to a date time. And so let's take a look at some different ways that you can do that in Python. We'll give you kind of an overview here of the basics. Okay, so first, let's go ahead and open up a new file and type a Okay, and let's start off with a really basic conversion here, first of all. So let's just save this, type conversions, Python. Okay, so let's convert to an integer from a string. So we'll use the int function, and we'll put a string in here, and put like the number 6, for example. And that completed successfully. Now let's go ahead and print that. Save that and run it. Okay, so there's the number 6. And now let's do something else here. Let's store this result. Let's store the number 6 there in this variable result. And now let's do a conversion on result instead of that string, the string literal. Okay, so let's save this and run it. Okay. Now let's, instead of using this string that we type into the program, let's instead replace this with an input function. So we're going to say, please enter a number. I'll put a space there, and then I'll just put a comment here to comment out that number 6. And we'll just say gather user input. Okay, now let's save this and let's run that. So now it's going to ask me for a number. I'll put in the number 7, and it prints out 7. So it is capturing the input as a string, and we can check that by using the type function. So we'll print the type of result. And let's save that and run that. And I'm going to enter a number 10, and it's going to say class string. So it's actually a string. And if I try to add that to a number, let's say like 5, I'm going to get an error message. So let's try that. So if I enter number 8, it's going to give me an error message. And that's because we're trying to add a string to a number, so that's not going to work. Okay, now let's try converting to a floating point number. So one way to do that is to simply multiply and we'll call this result int. So we'll convert this to an int. And then we'll print result int. Okay. All right, let's save that. Just make sure that we're still working okay. Okay. So now let's come over here, and we're going to enter a number. Let's put in the number 20, for example. Okay, it says it's a string. We converted it to an integer. It's working great. Okay, now let's go to, instead of an integer, let's see if we can get a floating point.
So let's get going on our spreadsheet model. I'm going to work on a model.
Okay. So now let's put, we're going to convert this to a float. So we'll call this result float equals, and then we'll just take result int, and we'll just simply multiply that by a floating point number. So in this case, 1.0. So And then we'll print the type of it, and then we will output both the integer version as well as the floating point version. Okay, let's try this. We'll enter a number, say 15. Okay, so it's a string initially, then we convert to a floating point number by multiplying by 1.0. And then we print out the integer, and then we print out the floating point number. So you'll notice the floating point number has a decimal 0 at the end of it. Okay, and now let's convert that float back into a string. And we can use the stir function for that. Okay, now let's save that, and now let's run that. Okay, so we'll enter a number like 3, and now we'll see that it was a string. We converted it to an integer, and then to a floating point number. We print out the int and the floating point number, and then we convert it to a string. So now let's go ahead and print out that result as well. And let's just move this here. And we'll do a similar thing where we print the result type as well as the integer up here. Okay, so let's run that again. Okay, so we'll enter number 7, for example. Okay, so we start off as a string, we convert to an int, there's the int. Convert it to a float by multiplying by 1.0, now there's 7.0, and then we convert it back to a string, and there is the string. So the difference here is, I can do multiplication with that int, and same with the float. I can take this float here. And I can add another floating point number to it. So let's run that real quick. Let's take a look. So put in 4. Okay, great. Then we added 1.5 to the 4, and we see we've got 5.5. So we can print that out here. There we go. And then we convert it to a string, and it also looks like 5.5. So there we go. We're converting from strings. We're able to take input from the user, take that input string, convert it to an integer, convert it to a floating point, and then be able to convert it back to a string. One other thing that is really interesting to be aware of is that, let's say now we have this floating point number 5.5, and we want to convert it back to an int. So we could take the result string and use the int function to convert that to an int. And one thing we'll notice here when we do that, so if I use 4 and now it's 5.5, okay, so it says we have an invalid literal for int. So it's not able to convert that string into an int. So now if we were to do this with a float instead, and let's print out, let's just comment this out and comment this out for now. Okay, and let's rerun this. Okay, that worked fine. It was able to convert it back to a floating point number using the float function. That worked great, but converting to an int didn't work. So if you have a fractional number, there's one thing that you can do with that is you can take that and convert that float to an int. We'll just have this, and we'll use that floating point number. And what we'll do is we can round it. So now it's rounded it to 6. As you can see, 5.5 rounded up to 6. So that's one way to do it. The other way to go would be to, instead of rounding, would be to take, and the other way to do it, it would be to convert to an integer where it just truncates the decimal, just using the int function on a floating point number. It's rather than rounding it, it's just going to drop the 0.5 off the end. So in the one case, we rounded and it went up to the nearest whole number. In the other case, we just converted to an int, and that basically just truncated it. So let's try, let's say we add 1.9 to this. And you can see it was 5.9, but when we convert it to an integer, it still came out 5 because it simply drops any decimal places versus the round function will give you the closest whole number. And so let's say we just added 1.4. Then you can see it ends up as 5 in both cases because it rounds down to 5 since it's 5.4. And when we truncate it, it's also 5. So there are a couple different ways that you can do that. All right, we're going to do more with type conversions in the future. And so we wanted to just go through a couple of examples here on how you can use the float function, the int function, the round function, and the stir function to convert between different types. And we'll get into some more complex examples in the future. So if you have questions, add them to the comments and let us know what else we can cover in the future. Thank you so much, and we will be back soon.